So 10 rules for successful presentations. We have, yay, it worked. Okay. So my suggestion to you is to begin with the end in mind, which is a Stephen Covey 7 Habits type of suggestion. But what's your end goal? What's your objective in your presentation? And look at the rubric requirements. How many of you look at a rubric before you start building a presentation? At what point? At the beginning, the middle, the end? The beginning, as you're going, you look at the rubric as you go at the beginning. Anyone else? Will anybody confess or admit that you have looked at a rubric at the last minute, at the very end of a project? Anyone? I've definitely done that before, and especially in grad school. If I don't check the rubric on the front end, then I might realize I totally went in the wrong direction and have to start over, which really stinks, right? So what do you want your audience to remember? What are you marketing or selling? So that applies to us. So when I'm having you build a presentation because you're trying to sell something or create an ad, or like in our product update project, what is it that you're trying to sell to the consumer? Or if you're pitching it to a business and you're trying to convince them to add a new Pepsi product to the Pepsi line, or a new coffee drink to Dunkin' Donuts, right? So you're marketing to that company, trying to sell that project. So make sure when we do our marketing projects for the rest of the semester that you know, am I marketing to the customer, the consumer, or am I marketing to the business owner? Okay. So that's just an opening statement to make sure you stay focused on what your goal is. Okay. So some tips on building a presentation, and I saw some violations on this in our presentations last week, but I didn't count off on it because I just want to make sure going from this point on, we're all on the same page, okay? So keep your presentation clean, make sure it's not too busy. Pictures can enhance a presentation, and you guys use those sometimes, and they can help connect information. Our brains actually process images more than words, and we'll remember an image more than we'll remember a paragraph on a slide, okay? So you also don't want to have too many pictures. So make sure that you don't have a picture that's distracting, that brings the focus away from the information that you're trying to tell or teach, right? And then each slide you should park on it for about a minute or possibly less. You shouldn't talk for a really long time with one slide up because your audience will check out, kind of like you guys might be doing right now. Okay, so include graphics, but you don't necessarily want a GIF on every single slide. I can tell you I had a personal finance presentation. A student put one on every single slide, and they were so distracting, like money flying through the air and stuff like that, that it was hard even for me as a teacher to listen to what he was saying in his presentation because it was just way too busy. So don't distract or confuse your listener, okay? Here's a biggie. Do not write paragraphs. Don't copy and paste full text and put it into your presentation. Your presentation, your words should be like a place to hang a hat on, right? It's a reference for you to know what you want to say next. So you should not have a full paragraph. Also, your tendency, if you have a full paragraph on the slide, your tendency is to just turn and read off the slide, right? Because who's going to memorize paragraphs for a presentation? Not me, right? So just a few words to remind yourself where you're going next, kind of a roadmap for your presentation. You know what I mean? Do you guys use roadmaps? It's a GPS directions of where you're going, okay? So make sure you know your content and you know what you're going to say so that those few words help you. Okay, here's a biggie. Is this hard to read? Especially the blue one, right? The blue one's hard to read. What about this? Is that easier to read? Okay, so you can see a lot of color confuses the eye, and it makes it harder for your brain to process the words because it's doing so much work trying to process the contrast and color that it's hard to process the text. So I really wanted you to see what I wrote, so I put it in black and white for you. But there's are different types of fonts that you can use for presentations. Arial, Calibri, Bell, and Lucida Sans look better on a screen. For print, like newspaper, magazines, those types of ads, Courier, Georgia, Times New Roman. You journalism students, what do you guys use for the newspaper? Do you know what font?
I think we use like Roboto. I don't know.
Roboto?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a rounded wording. Does it look like the B's and like kind of round? Okay. And then these really hard to read fonts may look cool, but it makes your viewer work way too hard to try to process the information. So you want them to take in your message and not be working too hard to read your message, right? Okay, so correct font size. You don't want to have like 3 or 4 different font sizes on one slide. Again, that's confusing. So if you are going to have a couple of different sizes, you want maybe 2 at the most on a slide. It makes it more readable and your viewer will remember it better, okay? Next, your title should be short, like 2 to 5 words. You should not have a title up at the top. So where it says 5 titles, that's my title for that slide. So it shouldn't be so long that you word wrap and it's like a 3-line title. That's not a title, that's a paragraph, okay? So 2 to 5 words. Try to figure out how to succinctly narrow it down. And if you need to use a subtitle or a subheading underneath, you can do that. And you can center your titles. I prefer left justified, honestly, because I just think it organizes the eye better, but that's a personal preference. And I'm not going to impose that rule on you. You can center your titles, okay? 6x6 rule. Who's heard of that before? No? No one? That is actually in almost all of my rubrics, the 6x6 rule. Okay, so I'll make sure that they're in there because that was crickets. So 6 words per line, 6 lines per slide. If you have more than that, it can get really overwhelming for your viewer. And also, you enter into the I'm writing a paragraph type situation if you have more words than that. So if I give you a requirement for a slide, just make sure you're trying to narrow it down to the point that you have 6 words per line, 6 lines per slide. That's your 6x6 rule. And if you can use less, you should. And even the indented ones you can see are part of my lines. So if going down, I have 3 left justified and 4 indented. Okay, which is more than 6. Okay, so choose the correct background. So look at this. Everyone look at the screen. Is that harder to read or easier? It's harder to read. So sometimes a picture is your background. The picture is cool. I'm not saying it's not cool. I love pictures of the forest, but it makes it hard for me to read the text that's been superimposed on it. Okay, so going back, choose a background that makes it easier and not harder for your viewer to process what it is you're trying to communicate. It's easier on the eyes. You can break a picture. So I didn't go to the trouble to do that in this presentation, but you can take a photo image and split it in half and have half the picture on one side of your text and half the picture on the other, okay? But just be consistent, okay? All right. White space. It's funny because I used a black background for this, but white space would be like negative white space. Have you guys ever heard of that concept? Where you have this white space that's just empty space that is there to make sure your slide is not cluttered, right? And don't feel like you have to fill up the whole slide with different things like images or animations, okay? So this is the rule of thirds. Think of like a tic-tac-toe board. When you're designing, you can divide it up and you can maybe have some text on either side of an image. That helps break up the text for the eye. Animations and sounds. How many of you know how to add animations in Google Slides? A few of you. Okay, so when we're going to work in Canva today, but when we get to the next time I want you to build a slide presentation, I'll do a quick tutorial on how you can add animations and sounds to your slides, okay? Make sure that you don't use animations that are like just too overwhelming. Like, have you ever watched a presentation where somebody has every single slide spinning in and then spinning out, right? That can get, for one slide, if you want to highlight it, that can be fine. But if you have that on every slide, then none of it's special, right? And then you're just, as the audience, you're sitting there saying, oh my gosh, when's this going to be over? I don't know. Maybe you're not thinking that. I do. Okay. Be consistent with your transitions, okay? So I have them all flying in from one side. I don't have them switching up all the different ways I can slide in. Just be consistent. That's more professional. And the reason I'm talking about this to you guys is because in marketing, we're business professionals, right? And so we're creating presentations that are mimicking or imitating what you would do in the marketplace. And so if I was going into a business to pitch a new Subway ad, I would have the same transitions on all of my slides. I would be consistent because that's more professional. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit of basic design, okay? So this has to do with what color text or font you use on top of what color background. Which one of those is easier to read? The yellow on the blue is easier than the red on the blue. The red, it's like almost out of focus, right? It kind of makes it look fuzzy. Okay, which one of those?
Choice
A. Choice A is easier to read. Okay. Okay, so which of those is easier to read? A? Yeah, so if you type in all caps, it's harder, and especially the font choice there, that kind of fairy tale font, it's harder to read the opening sentences of poo, right? Which graphic is more clear? Right, the smaller graphic. So that's part of that negative white space. You don't want to like just fill up your slide by maximizing an image and making it bigger, because it's going to make it look more pixelated, and your slide will not be as professional anymore. It'll be blurry or look wonky. Santa looks a little scary there. All right, which background is better?
The one on the left.
Right, the clean lines, the green and the white. The color adds just a little bit of flair to it without being overwhelming, right? I know a lot of elementary age people that love rainbows, but you wouldn't want to do that for your background in a professional setting, right? Okay, which statement is easier? The bottom one. So this is an example of, instead of having a whole paragraph or a full sentence, you have bullet points of the key things. My name is Erin Smith. I'm an instructional technology specialist for the Wichita Public School System. Erin Smith, instructional technology specialist, Wichita Public Schools. Much easier to read. And she probably knows who she is, so she doesn't need a full sentence about it, right? Okay, so if you're going to convey data or talk about your target market or how many people in an area would be interested in a new potato chip flavor or whatever, I think a visual graph, a bar graph, communicates more than a bunch of numbers up on the screen. Do you guys agree? What do you think? Which is easier? The right, because in the left you have to process all those numbers and kind of try to figure out what it's saying. Okay? All right, so use contrasting colors when you're choosing images and colors, right? Those are good. The blue and yellow is good. That bright bluish greenish color, I can't decide I guess it's aqua, right? On the yellow, that's really hard to read. That's a struggle. The aqua on pink is good, but the blue on pink is bad. Okay, do you guys know why? They're what? Complementary colors that are too close together are going to cause problems as far as not being enough of a contrast, right? So if I have a warm color on top of a warm color, they're too similar to be able to read, okay? So you want contrasting colors. Okay. Here's some other examples. Okay, so some of you, when you used color and your text, it was hard to read, right? It made me work too hard to see your image. So be careful about that when you are working on your projects. Bright on dark, dark on bright. Some more examples.